You wake to a sound that doesn't belong to a morning, silence so dense it hums. No crackle from last night's fire, no soft pop of pine sap bursting in embers. Just your breath, slow and fogged, rising like a small ghost above a mattress that crinkles when you shift. It's 1886, western frontier country, and the kind of cold that doesn't greet you. It judges you. Your first mistake would be to move fast. The pioneers learned not to. There's a ritual to mornings like this, a small choreography you repeat until it becomes muscle memory. You wiggle your fingers and toes inside the cocoon of blankets, testing for sting or numbness, listening to those ancient alarm bells that ring from nerve endings when frostbite is sniffing around. Your second mistake would be to reach for floorboards with bare feet. Even through wool socks, the planks feel like metal left to moonlight. They steal heat you can't spare, so you start with gratitude. Not because life on the plains turned you into a preacher overnight, but because gratitude makes your hands steady, and steady hands are how fires come back to life. The clothes you tucked at the bed's foot last night, wool shirt, long johns, mended socks, the vest with a hand line where the thread ran out, still warm from your own body heat. You pull them on beneath the covers like a magician changing costumes under a cape. It's a small trick the old-timers passed down. Never put your day on straight from the cold. Let your bed do some of the work. The window is white, not white. With dawn, not yet. White with ice ferns feathered so thick you could etch your initials in the frost. When you exhale, your breath blooms and hangs there as if the air is deciding whether to keep it. The cabin walls tick and shrink with the cold. The roof creaks a warning you've come to recognize. And still, you wait listening for any hint that the coals banged under last night's ash might be alive enough to coax. They aren't. Not today. You move. Finally, with a kind of focused slowness that looks like calm and is actually discipline. The small iron stove sits patient and black. In the corner, a square altar to heat. You've laid your kindling in neat bundles, the thin shavings that curl like wood ribbon. The finger-width twigs stacked so air can move between them, a twist of paper saved from a feed sack. Your match tin slept inside your vest overnight to keep it dry. Habit makes survivors. With a thumb, you learned to keep free of splits. You strike, cup, breathe gentle, not desperate hand. Flame arrives like a tiny rumor that yes, the day can be started. It's not the big logs that matter at first. It's the posture of your body, knees bent, shoulders rounded around the new fire. Hand forming a windbreak so the match's small miracle isn't bullied by drafts that snake in through the chinked wall. When the first thin flames take, you add a little more, a bit thicker, then thicker still until the stove begins to drum heat into metal, then into air, then into you. But the plains are not a forest. Out here, groves of postcards and timber, rides on wagons with a price. So you do what people here did. You reach for the fuel that kept families alive when trees were an idea and not a guarantee. Buffalo chips, when there were buffalo enough to leave their signatures scattered like a natural coal yard. And, after the annihilation, cow chips. They're dry and clean burning, stacked in a lidded crate that keeps snow out. And when they catch, they burn steady, not glamorous, but reliable in the way everything must be on land that eats the careless. Heat comes like news. Slow, then all at once. Your fingers tingle with thaw, the kind of bright pain that pioneers. Nicknamed so they could laugh at it. The stove makes soft metal sounds, satisfied. In that rising warmth you set a pot with oats and a pinch of salt. Maybe you add coffee if you're rich in the ways that matter in January. Maybe you boil a pine needle tea, tart with a promise of vitamin C. You eat standing because the day won't wait, because you learned long ago that chairs are a summer luxury. Everything's a system now. Mittens, not gloves, keep the fingers. Together, let them share what little heat they can make. 2 pairs of socks and boots rubbed with fat to turn away wet. A wool scarf doubled and pulled up over your nose so the air you breathe isn't a knife. A hat that comes down over your ears, if you're fancy or lucky, fur. If you're practical, layers add until you feel clumsy, then add one more. You open the door and the cold slaps you in a way that would be offensive if it weren't so honest. Wind hauls across the flat like it has freight to deliver. Your eyes water, then your tears try to freeze on your lashes. The sky has that low, stamped-in look the old folks warned you about. Somewhere to the west, weather is pulling on boots. The animals see you and make sounds that are part greeting, part complaint. They survived the night because they huddled, and because you stacked straw along barn walls to blunt the wind, and because you learned where drafts were born and choked them with rags. Their breath pillars up into the frozen air like chimneys. You take your axe to the skin of ice in the trough. The first blow rings, the second fractures, the third opens a black mouth of liquid that steams. You carry hay, and there's math in every forkful. Stretch the bales to march, but not so thin the bodies won't last to see it. All the while, you listen to the weather's grammar, to the way the wind changes pitch around the eaves, to the bird silence that means a front is shouldering its way in. You're not a mystic, you're a student. Out here, the sky publishes the only newspaper that matters. Back inside, the stove has pushed the cabin from cruel to stern. You shrugged out of your outer layers so sweat won't betray you later by freezing. You eat what you call breakfast and what a city would call fuel. And then, because good fortune is built and not wished for, you prepare for a day that may outgrow your plans. The rope you strung between cabin and barn last winter, you check it. You run your gloved fingers along its length and feel where the knots have hardened and the fibers have swollen with frost. You add a second line, lower for a child's hand, or for your own if wind doubles you over. You pile fuel beside the stove, and you sweep ash like a person who expects to need every inch of that iron's belly. You set aside a lantern, check the wick, sniff the oil to make sure it's not turned. You lay out a rescue sled you built from a door and 2 runners, because the difference between a homestead and a history is whether you plan for bad luck. Only then do you allow yourself a minute at the window. The world past the ice lace is grey, one vast unfinished thought. You put your hand flat to the pane and feel how the cold wants to claim it. You pull back. You're not poetry today. You are practice. You bank the fire to hold while you're gone and step once more into the morning that looks like the inside of a pewter bowl. The wind lifts and shoulders into you, a bully and a teacher. Somewhere a mile off, a cottonwood rattles, its bare twigs like bones. Somewhere beneath the snow, the prairie breathes, biding time, tougher than the men who misjudge it and the money that tries to tame it. You pull your scarf higher, set your jaw, and go about the business that keeps bodies warm and names alive. The cold has grown teeth. You've grown them, too. Asterisk, you don't dress for style on the frontier. You dress for a negotiation with physics. The cold has terms, and you meet them layer by layer. Against your skin you wear wool scratchy, yes, but faithful when wet, when sweat tries to turn treacherous. Cotton is for summer weddings and shrouds, winter eats it. The long underwear pulls up over your hips like a promise you intend to keep. The shirt is flannel with elbows patched by a hand that knew your measurements. By feel. The vest does a quiet job no one thanks it for, keeping your core's furnace from squandering heat. On your legs, trousers heavy enough that the seams remember last year's storms. If there's riding to be done, leather chaps will cut the wind. And if you're lucky, there are woolies the shagged kind that look like a joke until they save your knees. Socks, then socks again, then boots you've greased with beeswax until they shine like wet bark. Mittens over gloves, if you can manage the grip, because 5 fingers are 5 liabilities unless you make them a team. A hat that earns the right to be called one. A scarf you can pull up when the air hits a number that invents new curse words. Clothing is choreography. You add heat traps and wind walls. Space for air to warm and nowhere for it to escape. You button and tie and wrap until you move like a person inside a small, mobile house. There's nothing elegant about it. Elegance out here is defined by a different dictionary. Dry, warm, alive. The sky mid-morning is higher than dawn, but it's not more generous. The wind has found its angle and is pushing the same sentence through every gap in the land. You've strung your lifeline between house and barn rope at shoulder height and 1 at hip. 2, because experience wrote that paragraph, you keep. 1 mittened hand on the line and the other free to work. Visibility is fine for now, but weather here can pull a curtain with the speed of a thought. The rope isn't dramatic. It's insurance you hope never to cash. Asterisk. The animals are restless. They know what you know because bodies know what barometers only confirm. You break ice again, what you broke at first light has reskinned feed again. Rub frost from a mare's whiskers and watch her shake it free. Your breath and hers make temporary fog that the wind chews up like candy floss. On the way back, you stop to look at your own tracks, crisp and blue-edged in the snow. You're making a habit of noticing. That's what the survivors do. The old Lakota man who passed through in summer traded you stories for coffee. He taught you how snow writes notes about last night, where the fox crossed, where the wind changed, how the drifts lean. His fingers traced in the dust on your table, and you learned because you shut your mouth and watched. You think about that now as you study the yard. It will matter when the whiteout comes. Your stomach is a clock you can trust. You heat beans, the good kind you soaked overnight, and a chunk of salt pork if there's any left. You don't sit because the chair is too far from the stove and the stove is your god. You sip coffee that's gone thin but still makes your bones think faster. You do the math in your head without moving your lips. Wood chips, lantern oil, meal, flour, fat, beans. Days to spring if spring behaves. Days to spring if it doesn't. You don't scare yourself with the second number. You respect it. Then the day changes. It's nothing at first. The way all important things arrive. A pause in the wind so pure your ears ring. A sudden crispness to shadow edges. The kind of quiet that used to mean a teacher was raising a hand. You go to the door because the body is a compass. You open it and the cold leans in like a creditor. The first flakes are absurd in their innocence, slow and fat. Each one an individual piece of knowledge falling from a library. You watch 3 melt on your sleeve. Then you stop indulging the poetry because poetry doesn't stack fuel. Inside. You move through your checklist like you were born with it. Fuel, near, piled high and away from sparks. Water, buckets topped off before pumps grow numb or handles freeze into mean positions. Lanterns trimmed, wicks right, chimneys wiped so light won't smoke. The sled you would rather not need, but wheel checked, rope coiled, blanket stowed. You eat again because you learned the hard way that hunger argues with good judgment. You set aside ready food in a pail with a lid, the kind you can grab in a hurry and eat with one mitten on. You tuck matches in 3 places and flint in a 4th. You pull a spare scarf into your coat pocket, not because you'll forget the first, but because wind steals. Snow has opinions now. It comes sideways from somewhere endless. It arrives not as flakes, but as a presence, a white argument that gets in your lashes and the lines of your gloves. The yard that had corners has none. The horizon that was a sentence is a blank page. The rope you strung is now the backyard spine, and your hand on it is one more kind of prayer. You go once more to the barn before you decide you can't. The animals are shapes with breath. You wedge the door so it won't slam and startle them into panic. You pitch hay and the dust glitters in the lamplight like summer inside a bottle. You talk to them out loud, steady nonsense with their names in it. They calm because you calm. On your way back to the cabin, you keep your hand on the line and your head down and your body angled like a ship. Snow needles your cheek and finds the tiny opening at your collar and argues for it. You do not negotiate. You get inside. The door thumps shut and sound returns stove breath, fabric whispering as you shed a layer. The window is now a white square. There's no outside. You bank the fire, not low, not yet. You feed it until the metal hums, until the air gets that baked quality that means you'll be all right until evening. You light the lamp early because whiteouts make noon feel like midnight. You sit for a minute. You don't call it fear. You call it awareness sharpened to a point. You fill the cabin with tasks that matter: mending, tightening, checking, making. You cut new draft stoppers from an old quilt and tuck them at the threshold. You stitch a glove's ripped seam that would have cost you a finger if you ignored it. You scrape the stove's plate and save the cleanings because fuel is fuel. You write 3 lines in a notebook you pretend isn't a journal. Date, wind, first snow, a liar, then a bully. You smile despite yourself. Evening lands like a blanket thrown from a tall height. You eat the stew you promised yourself at noon. You drink water because cold tricks thirst into leaving. You bank the fire proper, this time embers pulled forward. Fresh fuel laid crosswise. A drift of ash shoveled over to teach the wood to smoulder, not burn. The lamp goes low. The room turns to a cave you made yourself. Before sleep, you listen through the wall. The wind has a voice you're learning to interpret. Tonight, it's a scream with edges, not the low sheet trip that means an all-night grind. You think of neighbors. The McCrae's 2 miles north on New, thin on stores and thinner on wisdom. The Fairchilds to the west have 5 children and a way of making do that humbles you. You make a plan on the ceiling while you lie under heavy blankets. Check the McCrae's at first light. If the rope line holds and the world returns, shapes. Check the Fairchilds after, sled if you must. You place your boots where your hands can find them in the dark. You wrap a scarf, fold it, rest it on your chest like a promise. Sleep takes you like a door you lean on without realizing it was open. The wind keeps shouting, but sound is distance when you are this tired. You breathe slow and deep, a bellows serving the body's small, bright fire. Outside, the storm writes its terms in drifts and ice. Inside, you sign only what you must. Asterisk morning doesn't exactly arrive. the dark just waters down a little. You wake to a cabin crusted with glitter along the nail heads and edges where your breath met the cold and made a treaty. The stove is drowsing but not dead. You talk to it with kindling and patience, and it forgives you for sleeping. The first cup you drink is heat, not coffee. The second has grounds that would tell fortunes if you believed in that kind of thing. Then you test the door. It pushes back like a shoulder with orders. Snow has thrown itself against the cabin's north side and climbed high enough to count. As a visitor, you wedge it open an inch, then 3, then an arm's length. The world beyond is a theatre scrim-flat light, no horizon, the kind of white that steals depth. You can't see the barn, which is obscene because it's not a dozen strides away. You tie yourself to the rope, literally loop around the waist, knot you could undo with mittens if the world went wrong. You pull your scarf up and your hat down and you go. The first lesson of a whiteout is that memory lies. You think you know the distance between things. The storm disagrees. The second lesson is that walls and fences become knives, snow piles, and then the wind moves it in a fit, leaving edges hard as carved stone. You catch your shin once and swear into your scarf, and then you slow because speed is bragging and bragging gets punished. The barn door is a ghost under a drift. You shovel with your gloved hands, first because tools are for later, because skin knows how to be gentle with wood, and then with the flat of a plank you propped there in October for this very scene. Inside, the animals have made a kind of weather of their own, breath and warmth, and the sound of hay being turned into life. You check each fingers along ears, eyes bright or dull, the mare's ankle that puffed last month holding fine. You break ice again. The trough skin is a stubborn habit. You do your math with feed, yeah, again. Because the numbers change with each mouthful, and you choose generosity this morning because the night stole more heat than you planned for. On your way back, the rope saves you twice. Once when the wind shifts and you take a step in the direction your body swears is home but your hand says is wrong. Once when the snow under your boot collapses into a drift trap and you sink to the knee and need leverage that isn't air. The door into the cabin is suddenly something you could weep about. You press it closed and lean your forehead against the wood, and not because you're dramatic. Because you're human. You eat hot food like it's medicine prescribed by a doctor who knows your name. You re-warm fingers that haven't forgotten last winter's lesson about blackened tips. You listen to the roof and hear a weight shift. You take the long pole you kept for this exact chore and you climb on a chair and you thump near the eaves. Gentle enough not to crack boards, firm enough to tell the snow it's not welcome to linger where it will crush. Outside, a sheet sloughs off with a thud, and the cabin breathes a little easier. You think of the McRaes. The storm has turned them from neighbors into a responsibility you agreed to the day they showed up in June with hands soft from office. Work and a wagon full of optimism. You decide. Not a heroic decision, a practical one. You coil extra line, lash the sled's rope to your belt, pack a pail with food you can eat in 3 bites, tie down a blanket. You chalk a note on the table. For no one but yourself, back before dusk. Then you open the door and let the cold interview you again. The rope to the barn is your runway to the world. Past the barn, there's nothing to tie to until the McRae's fence line, so you make your own waymarking as you go. Stakes cut in summer for just this reason. You drive one at the yard's edge, where you can still see the cabin, another where the land does that subtle dip, a third at the cottonwood skeleton that still shows a dark rib through snow. You run a guiding line from stake to stake with numb fingers that remember how knots work even when thinking slows. You give the storm less room to negotiate. The traveling is ugly. You find the rhythm of lifting and setting, like walking in wet concrete. You fall twice, and the falls make you angry in a useful way. The rope belt is a patient friend that keeps you from drifting into the blank places where stories end. When the McRae fence finally looms from the white, you could kiss it if it weren't edged in ice. You pound on their door and the sound is swallowed. You pound again and lean in and yell names like a person trying to pull someone back from a sleep that's too deep. Then, blessedly, a shadow shifts and a bar lifts and the door opens to air that smells like smoke and fear. They are their and that's the headline. Cheeks raw with windburn, eyes wide, the baby complaining in the brave way small things complain. They are underdressed and underfed and more embarrassed than they are in danger, which is how many good stories on the frontier start. You don't lecture, the weather already did. You move through their tiny rooms with a quickness that suggests you're casing the place when you're actually inventorying, fuel low, water frozen in the bucket, food enough for today but not tomorrow. You hand the father your spare scarf and teach him in 30 seconds the trick of wrapping so breath warms what you're about to inhale. You take the mother's hands and put them on the kettle and tell her the pain of thaw is normal and temporary. You pour oat porridge into a tin cup and watch the baby grab it with both palms and smear hope on her chin. Then you go to their yard and string a line like you did at home. You show the father the half hitches you love best because you can untie them with gloves on. You knock the ice off his pump and teach him the trick of the warm rag and the patient twist. You stack their fuel neater and closer and show them how to bank a fire so that it will give them a morning and not a grudge. You don't stay for thanks. You haven't done a miracle. You've done what people do out here when survival is a group project. The way back is both worse and better. Worse because you've been out long enough that your body is dipping into the reserves it was saving for tonight. Better because you've cut a path and because you can almost see yourself forward when you squint right. You stop once. Not to rest, that's a word for summer, but to close your eyes and listen. There is a tone to the storm now that says it's blown through the anger and is into endurance. You'll take endurance. You know how to match that dot inside again. The cabin hugs you like a creature with fur you can't see. You shed the outer world layer by layer, and each layer is a decision to live. You stoke the stove, eat what's left of stew, drink water warmed because your throat has gone tight, and then you let the shaking come for a minute. You put your hands flat on the table and you ride it like a horse that needs to run. When it passes, you're still here. The evening is a quiet kind, the kind a person earns. The wind has dropped one register, the lamp smokes a little, and you adjust the wick with a tenderness that surprises you. You write another line in the notebook you pretend not to keep, rope held. McCrae's okay, cold and animal, teachable. You bank the fire like a parent tucking a child, and you tuck yourself the same way. Sleep arrives with a sigh, in the dark. The difference between the door to the barn and the door to the neighbor's cabin shrinks to nothing. Both are thresholds you cross to keep a promise you made when you chose this land. The promise isn't brave or noble. It's ordinary, and that's the point. We will look for one another when the white comes down. Asterisk, some days are storms. Some days are the work you do so storms won't write your ending. Today is the second kind, and it starts with a ritual that feels small and is everything. You open the stove door and listen. There's a sound you come to know if you live long enough on the frontier. It's not flame. Flame is obvious and flashy. It's the murmur of coals that slept warm and want to be useful again. You lay kindling with the respect of a person setting a table for a friend. You don't smother, you offer. When the small flames accept, you feed them a little, then a little more, and only then do you introduce something with heft. Patience is firecraft's first law. Pride is its enemy. You've learned both lessons in scars. Fuel is a portfolio. Now, you have cords of willow and box elder stacked and covered, a stash of chips dried under the eaves, a few precious splits of cottonwood that hold embers like a grudge. You mix them because mixed fires don't sulk when you turn your back. You keep a bucket of ashes because ashes are a tool insulation when you bank. Grit when you need traction at the threshold. Polish when you want to shine a pan that did. Hard duty, foodcraft is the same kind of thinking transferred to the pot. You don't chase recipes, you chase outcomes. Hot, dense, salted enough to make a body remember it wants water. You soak beans because soaking makes them kinder. You save the fat skimmed from yesterday to start today, because fat is a furnace you eat. You drop a strip of salt pork in a pot and listen for that first, soft hiss that promises flavor. You cut onions fine so they surrender faster, and you brown them until the cabin smells like someplace with a restaurant. You add dried chili if you traded for it in the fall, because winter is long and mouths need surprise. The stew that follows isn't pretty, but it's loyal. You eat the first bowl with gratitude, and the second with purpose. You save the third for mid-afternoon, because 3 p.m. is when winter sneaks up and asks, "What's in your pockets?" You set water to simmer for chores. A rag in warm water is how a pump handle forgives you for touching it. Warm water is how mittens go from stiff to ready. Warm water loosens knots in your back you didn't have time to notice. Headcraft might be the most important craft of all, and nobody bragged about it on a cattle drive. This is the part where you decide how you'll talk. To yourself, you keep sentences short and gentle. Not lies never lies, but an edited truth that keeps panic small enough to step over. The fire is alive. The rope is sound. The neighbors are on their feet. You're doing fine. You move through tasks like beads on a string one, then the next, because a string of finished things is a door at dusk you can walk through without fear. You do repairs today, because repairs are the adult version of hope. A crack along the door frame gets stuffed with a twist of old linen and hammered tight with a thin shim. A window latch that's stuck in October gets filed and oiled and persuaded to remember its purpose. You take your boot knife to a stubborn knot in the wood stack and learn again that persistence is sharper than steel. You rebraid a halter rope, humming a nonsense tune that your grandmother used to hum when she sewed in a different century in a different kind of cold dot. When the sky brightens towards something that might be called noon, you go out. Not far, just a yard radius of decisions. You shovel the path from door to barn in curves, not straight lines, because curves don't drift shut as quick. You throw corn for the chickens and laugh, despite yourself, at their bossy commentary. You stand for a minute with your back to the barn wall where the sun, weak as watered milk, still manages a little warmth. You offer your face to it like a person, greeting a beloved after a quarrel. You check the line you ran to the Micrays yesterday. It's there, draped with diamonds, where blown snow has kissed the rope and frozen. You shake it gently where you can reach so it won't sag and trap more weight. You leave it otherwise. A road should remain a road until you don't need it. Back inside, you set to work on the quiet economics of making. You cut new candles from a tallow batch you poured in November, spinning wicks from cotton thread you unraveled from a ruined shirt. You read 2 pages from a book about a place with harbors and soft rain and boats that creak in a way that's not fearsome at all. You mend a sock and make the darning neat, because beauty isn't silly. Beauty is morale. You stick a note on the shelf in chalk. Save coffee for Sunday. The small discipline hurts. It also comforts. Afternoon brings a restlessness you've learned not to mistrust. Cabin fever is a phrase people throw around, like a joke until it isn't. You meet it head on with work that engages mind and body at the same time. You set up a small bench near the window where the light is best, and you plane a length of scrap into a new drawer runner for the table. The shavings curl and pile and smell like summer. Your hands remember angles and pressures that turn rough into smooth. You lose a half hour to the good kind of concentration, and when you come back to yourself, the wind has decided to calm down. For a while, that counts as a win. Pocket it. Toward evening, you write a letter you might never post. It's to a person you love in a place where the cold is a season, not a personality. You tell them about the storm and the rope and the Mick Greys, and you make it sound less lonely than it is, because that's how you keep loneliness from growing bold. You tuck the letter into the book you're reading so that, when you see it again later, you'll also see the you who made it through today. You cook again because eating once is fuel and eating twice is a plan. You slice the last of a turnip paper thin so it softens and sweetens quicker, and you stir it into the pot. You pinch in a little sage you dried on a string in August because memory tastes like something too. You cut a heel of bread and toast it on the stove plate and rub it with a bit of garlic. You found hard as a stone and still willing to be good. You sit on the stool nearest the stove like a pilgrim at a shrine, and you eat slowly on purpose. Before dark, you step out one last time. The world is a sculpture garden of forms you know by heart drift against the north fence. The slabby shoulder along the shed. The lean of snow on the stack of rails that needs a brace before March. The sky has that evening bruise along the west, and the first star shows up like someone you trust arriving 5 minutes early. You breathe in and the cold bites, and you bite back with a smile. It can't help itself. Neither can you. You bank the fire with ceremony tonight because ceremony turns habit into meaning. You lay the logs cross. You whisper a thank you don't need to. You shut the damper to the just right angle. You hang your socks at a polite distance and turn the mittens' palms out so the leather will remember softness by morning. You set boots where your feet can fall into them in the dark. You coil the rope by the door with the untangled care that keeps futures smooth. Then you do the thing nobody brags about. You rest, not the collapse kind, the deliberate kind that says tomorrow deserves a whole person. You climb under layers that know your shape, and you feel the bed accept your weight like an old friend's joke. Your breathing slows without your telling it to, because your body believes you've earned that, too. The last thing you hear is the tiniest pop from the stove, a small star going out in a universe you built with matches and patience and the stubborn joy of staying warm in a world that occasionally forgets you're here. Asterisk morning crawls in like it's carrying a burden, pale and reluctant. You wake to a cabin still standing but bent under the weight of snow. The fire didn't die. Careful banking worked, but it's sulking, coals red as old eyes. You coax them back to life with patience and a whisper of kindling. Breakfast is yesterday's beans reheated. eaten with one hand held out toward the stove like a child waiting for candy. The storm has paused. Not gone. Storms in 1886 never leave politely but paused, like a fighter catching breath between rounds. The sky is milk-colored, heavy but not spitting. You know this is the window, a brief one, the chance to do what you promised yourself last night. Check the Fairchilds. You prepare like a soldier, rope coiled, blanket rolled and lashed, food packed tight hardtack, dried apples, a sliver of pemmican, things you can eat while walking. The sled waits like a loyal dog, runners iced smooth. You strap it on, harnessed at the waist. If the snow deepens, you'll pull until your shoulders scream. Outside, the land looks erased. Where paths once lived, there's only smooth white. Drifts curl up against your cabin walls like waves paused in mid-break. Each step breaks the crust with a crunch, then sinks. Your thighs burn after 10 paces. But you go. Landmarks are everything now. The old cottonwood, half dead by lightning. Just a hump under snow, barely visible. Fence posts, buried to the top rail. The world has turned its pockets inside out. What's left are tricks. Listening for wind across the open. Watching how snow settles. Feeling the rope tug like it remembers direction even when your eyes don't. The Fairchild place is 2 miles as the crow flies. But today 2 miles is Everest. You slog, pull, curse, breathe clouds, then laugh because laughter keeps you sane. Your scarf ices over from your own breath. You pull it down, gasp air so sharp it feels like glass. You pull it back up, frost building on your eyelashes. This is not weather, this is an opponent. When you finally see it, just a chimney breathing. Smoke into still air, you want to fall to your knees. The Fairchild cabin squats low, snow-banked halfway up its roof. You pound on the door and it opens fast, warm air spilling out like gold. Inside, children huddle in layers of wool and quilts. Mrs. Fairchild's face is pale but steady. Mr. Fairchild shakes your hand like a drowning man shakes a rope. They're alive, but the larder is thin. Feed is down to dust. You share what you brought, enough for today, and promise more when the storm gives mercy. You check their rope, line barn, to house and show the eldest boy how to run his hand along it when he goes out. How to never let go, even if the world vanishes in white. You leave them stronger than you found them. That's enough. The way home feels longer, but it's lit by the thought of your own stove waiting. You pull the sled with steady steps, each crunch a drumbeat. By the time you collapse inside your cabin, face raw, hands stiff, you know one thing: nobody survives alone. And tonight, when the storm gathers again, you'll bank your fire, lay your head, and remind yourself those miles became mountains, and you crossed them anyway. Part 6. When the wind stopped breathing, dig out and head counts dawn after a storm is not. Sunrise, its revelation. The wind has stopped, and silence is so thick it feels like cotton packed in your ears. You push open the door and it resists, heavy with drift. Snow spills in when you force it, piling on your floor like an uninvited guest. The world is white sculpture now. Fences gone, barns reduced to lumps under snow. Even the outhouse has vanished. It's beautiful in a way that hurts, sunlight bouncing off billions of tiny mirrors until your eyes water. But beauty is dangerous. You squint, tie a scarf across your face, and get to work. Digging is survival. First, the path from cabin to barn, your rope buried but still there, guiding your shovel strokes. Then the roof, because weight kills more cabins than cold does. You push snow off with a long-handled rake, hearing it slide and thump. Every movement sends sweat down your spine, and you learn again the frontier law. Sweat is a liability. In winter, you pace yourself, slow and deliberate, stopping often to breathe. Inside the barn, animals shift and snort, restless. Their water is ice again, so you break it, haul buckets, feed them hay with the care of a banker counting gold. They've survived another night because you refuse to sleep through yours. By mid-afternoon, neighbors appear figures, dark against the glare. The McCrae's cheeks raw, eyes wide. You wave them in, sit them by the stove, feed them hot stew. They thaw like logs catching flame. Their voices tremble when they talk about snow sealing their door, about not being sure which way was east. You nod. You don't say, "I told you so." Out here, lessons come from weather, not lectures, head counts. Matter after storms. You check on each place within reach. Smoke from chimneys is the census. A cabin with none sends a jolt through your spine. You set out, rope at your waist, sled behind. Sometimes it's nothing a fire gone out, owners digging free. Sometimes it's worse. You don't talk about worse. You help where you can, dig, patch, share, teach. That night, when you collapse into bed, muscles screaming, you understand why frontier diaries always speak of silence. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is proof the wind stopped breathing long. Enough for people to take stock, count their blessings, and start again. Asterisk, by January of 1887, the plains themselves looked like a battlefield. Ranchers who had boasted of thousands of head now walked among carcasses stiff as statues, frozen mid-step, tails and ears rimmed with ice. Some cattle had starved standing, their noses pressed to snow-covered ground where grass lay unreachable. Others piled against fence lines, crushed by panic and wind. The smell didn't come until spring, but the sight was enough. The Great Dipe, they called it, Littora, bitter joke on the roundup ranchers once celebrated. Entire fortunes vanished overnight. Men who rode high in town saloons, with boots on tables, now sat silent in cabins, staring at numbers. That wouldn't add up. Theodore Roosevelt was one of them. His Dakota ranch lost more than half its herd. He wrote later that the losses were crippling. He had money from the East, enough to recover, but many neighbors did not. They left behind empty barns and names carved into wooden crosses. The winter rewrote ranching itself. The open range air road, the dream of endless herds on endless grass died under snowdrifts that year. From then on, survivors fenced land, cut hay, built shelters. Romance gave way to routine, but routine kept families alive. Asterisk. And still, settlers learned. Cattle drives shortened. Winter feed became a rule, not a luxury. Neighbors remembered the bodies found a yard from their doors and tied rope lines without shame. Hardship taught efficiency, and efficiency reshaped. The West let you see it in your own ledger. Haystacks mean survival. Buffalo chips mean fire. Rope lines mean neighbors counted come spring. Dead cattle teach lessons the living can't afford to forget. Long before cabins dotted the plains, winter had teachers who needed no books. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Blackfeet, they survived centuries of blizzards with systems honed to perfection. Tipis might look fragile to a newcomer, but they were marvels. A conical shape shed wind, inner linings created insulation, smoke, flaps vented fires without losing heat. In the coldest weather, snow banked at the base sealed drafts. Inside, Fires burned steady, warmth pooled, and families survived in comfort settlers never imagined. Location mattered. Location mattered in river valleys, where trees broke wind and water stayed open longer. They traveled lighter than settlers, carrying what was needed, moving when buffalo did. Never overstraining land that couldn't give. Food was preserved with wisdom. Pemmican meat dried, pounded, mixed with fat and berries lasted months, and fueled warriors through storms. Winter camps meant storytelling, games, ceremonies keeping spirits alive when days were short. Settlers arriving from Europe often ignored this knowledge. Some starved while the people who lived here for centuries thrived. Over time, though, borrowing began. Wool leggings inspired by hides, rope lines inspired by tradition. Firecraft learned from watching. The survival of many cabins owed itself quietly to indigenous winter genius, though history books often failed to admit it. And you, standing by your stove, pulling your scarf tighter, know the truth. This land had already taught survival. All settlers did was learn, slowly, painfully, from those who listened first. Asterisk, you learn. This far from town, that survival isn't one big decision. It's a long necklace of small, clever ones. Tools are not just iron and wood. They're agreements you've made with the season. You pick each one up like a sentence in a language you're finally fluent in. Start with the humble things. A length of rawhide, softened and twisted, dries into a rope that outlasts pride. You keep it hanging under the eave where the snow doesn't reach, and it tightens as it cures until you can feel the fiber's memory under your thumb. That rope pulls a sled, tethers a stubborn gate, and strung from door to barnbeck comes a lifeline that out-argues the white. Your knife is the argument you carry in your boot. Not flashy steel, just honest temper, sharpened on a stone you keep in your pocket so its grit never freezes. A good knife turns a frozen strap into a working latch, shaves kindling into curls that catch light, slices rawhide to mend a harness, opens a sack whose knot went mean in the cold. It's a surgeon, a carpenter, a negotiator. You oil it with a fingertip slicked from the bacon pan. It thanks you by behaving in the worst weather. Then there's the Sotherlong Tumen, kind with teeth like frost itself. In summer you cut dead for. In winter you pull that saw over ice. Lakes and ponds freeze thick, clear as bottle glass in the heart, milk white near the edges where air got trapped. You score a rectangle with the axe and drive the saw in at an angle, rocking the blade with a rhythm you feel in your ribs, breaths smoking in time. When the first block rises blue edges, a window to the underworld, you lever it up with pike, poles, and slide it to the sled. The blocks will live in a sawdust-packed ice house you built last October, a low hill of stored cold that will keep milk sweet when July comes, pretending it's in charge. The irony makes you grin. In January, you harvest summer. Firecraft has 100 small miracles, none of them glamorous. The box of pitch knots you saved from last year's split logs, fatty, resin-rich, sticky even through gloves are thunder. In a cold stove, you drop one on coals and it flares into confidence. Straw twists, rolled tight and tied with twine, are the poor man's fire starter. You keep them in a tin tobacco can because moisture is a spy that sneaks through lids. You respect the ways water changes its mind vapor to frost, ice to slush, slush to glass, and you store starters the way a banker keeps ledgers, dry, labeled, reachable in the dark. Fuel is not just wood. Out on the treeless runs, the plains gave people what they had in abundance. Buffalo chips when bison still shadowed the grass, cow chips after. You learned the difference fast. How to dry them so they kept without crumbling. How to stack them so air could flow. How to read a good chip by weight and sound. You learned there's no real smell to it when it burns. Just a steady, trustworthy heat that doesn't demand constant attention. A tip someone's grandmother gave you. Mix chips with a few splits of green willow and the stoveplate will hold a temper longer. Another, save the ash in a covered bucket. Sift it and you've got lye water for soap when spring mud makes everything. Human again. Windows frost, so you keep a scrap, of course, linen to wipe the inside panes in the morning before the sun hits. Wipe too late and the thaw comes streaked, then refreezes as lace that hides the world just when you need to see it. A trick. Rub a smear of tallow along the bottom sash. It slows condensation and makes the frost form higher, where you can ignore it. You learn to move light with mirrors one small, set on the sill to catch the anemic sun and bounce it deeper into the room. So you can read the good book or the bad news on a ledger without wasting lamp oil. You ration flame like it's coin. It is, your mittens become a workshop. The left thumb holds a nail. The right palm curves a strip of tin you snipped from a busted coffee can to make a draft guard for the hinge side of the door. Tin mutters when it flexes in the cold. You screw it down, and the winter wind loses one more argument inside your house. In your pocket, a wad of oakum tarred fiber plucked from a ship chandler's barrel in town last fall, packed into gaps. With a putty knife, until drafts turn around and go someplace else. If you don't have oakum, you twist newspaper into a rope and paint it with flour paste. It dries hard as a sermon and keeps January in its proper place. Food tricks are a theology. Beans aren't just beans, they're timing. Soak overnight. Drain at dawn. Simmer low near the stove's far corner so they never rage and split. Salt late so skins soften without bursting. A bay leaf if you traded for it. A scrap of bacon if you killed a hog in November and hung the pieces in the smokehouse like black dresses. Potatoes live in crates under the bed, nested in straw and their own dirt coats, because the floor's chill keeps them honest. Root cellars. Are dreams for richer people? You turn your bed into a small winter cave that hides food like treasure. You label jars with charcoal and a scrap of flour sack. July, peaches. August, tomatoes. September, corn. You ration sweetness the way you ration. Rope, careful, rare, celebratory. Snow is work and water both. After a storm, you scoop clean drift from the leeward side, pure as first light into a pot, and let it sink into itself on the stove. It takes a surprising amount to make a cup. The first pot tastes like air, the second tastes like home. A trick the trappers taught. Throw a hot stone in the snow pot, and it hurries the melt without scorching. Another, pine needles steeped 5 minutes no more, or the bitterness grows bold. Make a tart tea that keeps gums from bleeding when February tries to make you scurvy's friend. You learned that lesson one winter when a neighbor's smile went strange and his strength with it. You brought him rose-hip syrup from a thicket you mapped in September and watched color come back to his voice. You turned problems into furniture. The door you used as an emergency sled becomes, in fair weather, a tabletop that folds against the wall, held up by a leather strap nailed into a beam. The strap came from a harness that snapped under a load of green hay when you got greedy in October. You save everything because everything can be something else. The iron hoop from a busted barrel becomes a pot hook. The broken spoke becomes a cabin peg. The cracked wash basin becomes a chicken feeder when you solder its wound and hang it from A wire so the birds can't kick their dinner into the dirt. In town they call that thrift. Out here it's design. Your calendar is a box of nails. You keep track of storms by how many you bite between your teeth while you set shingles, by how many you drive into roof strapping to hold a snow fence that makes drifts form where you choose. You count weeks in cords and chips. You count days in the distance between shoveling and shoveling again. You count hours in the time between banking a fire and waking to a room. That's not cruel. Winter on the frontier is not an enemy you beat. It's a river you learn to ford every day, with better boots and smarter footing. Tools are the stepping stones. Tricks are the handholds. The quiet miracles, the ones no one writes on monuments, are the ways you teach your house to help. When you sleep, you dream of summer tools because sleep is generous. But you reach out in the night and your hand finds the match tin at the bedside, the wool socks laid across the chair, the scarf folded like a small, patient animal. You set your palm on the stove side, warm as a living thing, and think, we built this together, me, fire, iron, rope, trick, and time. Asterisk, asterisk. It's not just fingers that go numb in a winter like this. It's the part of the mind that counts light. You feel it sometime in late January when dawn loses ambition and dusk comes early like an excuse. The room shrinks, not by inch. Outlook. You move through the day like you're wearing an extra coat on the inside. Heavy, awkward, too warm with your own thoughts. People call it cabin fever like it's a joke. It isn't, so you practice medicine that doesn't come in bottles. The first dose is routine. Waking at the same beat, building the same fire, laying the same pot. The predictability is scaffolding. It keeps the mind from looking over the edge. You make small lists you can actually finish: men, left mitten seam, scrape stove plate, rotate. The straw tick head 2 foot, and you cross them off with ceremony because completion is a kind of heat. The second dose is sound. You pull out the fiddle from its blanket in the trunk and you tune it by memory and feel, not pitch pipes. The instrument smells faintly of pine and old rosin and the hands that taught you soldier's joy 10 years and a lifetime ago. Your fingers are stiff for the first tune, then they remember. Music builds a second room inside the cabin, warmer than the first and bigger besides. If you can't fiddle, you sink old hymns that move slow as a creek under ice, work songs that keep time while you peel turnips, nonsense tunes that make children cackle and grown men remember their grandmothers. The cabin learns your key and rings back, soft. From rafters smoked dark as coffee, stories are medicine, 2 strong ones, properly dosed. You read aloud by lamplight when oil allows, voice low and steady, shipwreck tales in a landlocked cabin. And somehow the ocean's cold makes your cold different, less personal. You spin yarns from your own head. That time last July when lightning ripped the sky open like fabric and the heifer calved in the rain and you worked in wet boots, laughing because summer's water is mercy. You tell a story about a cat who learned to use a rope line, and the child in you believes it so completely that you glance at the door expecting whiskers. You keep a winter book, not a confession, not a ledger, a place where you set down small facts with more care than they deserve. January 22nd, saw sun at 2:10, chickens laid 2. Wind had teeth. You draw the shape of a drift against the north wall and the shape of your boot inside it. You write a line you didn't expect. I am doing fine. Some mornings you have to borrow belief from yesterday's handwriting. That's allowed. Ritual makes small spaces larger. You sweep before breakfast because order in corners breeds order in hearts. You warm a stone and wrap it in a rag and tuck it at your feet before sleep, and the first minute of heat feels like forgiveness. Sundays mean clean shirt if you have one, brushed hair even if no one will see it. The big Bible open to a psalm you can mouth in time to your breathing. You don't always feel religious, but you always feel better after the reading. That's a kind of faith. You invite company when the sky allows to neighbors on a borrowed sled. Cheeks hammered pink by cold, eyes bright at the sight of lamplight through your frosted pane. You feed them something hot, because hospitality here is not virtue, it's mutual insurance. They bring a story for your shelf, and you send them home with a bundle of chips and a joke about interest rates. Laughter in winter is not an accident. It's a plan. Children, if you have them or borrow them, are weatherproofing for the mind. You assign them the serious task of keeping count of icicles, or the important job of turning the hourglass for bread rising. You let them build a town from wood scraps along the hearthstone and name it after somebody they miss. Cabin fever hates play. It falls back in the face of pretending, muttering, looking for a different house to haunt. You also move. Even when the world beyond the door is whining white, you step into the rope room between cabin and barn and do the work of a body. Chop kindling in measured sets, stack wood with an eye for pattern so your hands and mind can work at the same time. Shovel a path one shovel width wider than you need, because generosity with future you is a ward against gloom. 5 minutes at a time, repeated like prayer. The heart doesn't care how smart you are, it wants blood and breath. You give it those things so it will give you sleep later without bargaining. Medicine keeps a quiet shelf, too. Dried peppermint for stomach days. Willow bark tea when the wood hauling sneaks fire up your spine. A jar of rendered tallow with spruce pitch stirred in the salve that softens. Cracked knuckles and heels, small splits before they become big mistakes. You learned spruce pitch from a woman whose grandmother learned it, from a woman who learned it from a river valley older than the farm. Every smear of that salve is a handshake across time. There are rules for the mind you write down and tack to the inside of your skull. Don't borrow July's problems in January. Don't judge a person, especially yourself, by what gets done. On a day the wind scrapes the nails from the walls. Don't let silence lie to you. It is not an empty room. It is the room where endurance grows. Make beauty when you can. A pattern of stitches on a mitten no one will see under a coat. A shelf edge planed smooth. A loaf scored with a leaf that will open in the oven like a promise. When all else fails, you go to the door at night and open it wide for one breath. Cold steps in and socks your lungs. Stars step in, to rude, brilliant, uninvited, perfect. The sky is savage in January, unbothered, full of truths that don't require your permission. You look up and the world is suddenly so big that your cabins for walls feel like a choice you made, not a trap you fell into. You shut the door, gently like thanking a guest, and carry the starlight back to bed in your bones. Cabin fever doesn't vanish. It softens, like ice under a patient sun. It retreats to corners if you sweep the middle. It isn't conquered by will or cleverness, but by humble repetition of small, good things. Music, story, ritual, work, a shared bowl, a very clean table. A letter written to someone you love, even if you never send it. The mind is an animal that loves a trail. You walk it every day so it can find home no matter how the wind shouts. Asterisk, you notice it first as a drip one, then another from the eave, rhythmic as the clock you don't own. The sun climbs a hand higher than last week. Shadows loosen. The path you shoveled each day becomes a trench with walls that sparkle. Snow sags, then slumps, then gives up its crisp grammar and starts to mumble into water. You step outside and the air smells like metal and hope. Thaw is mercy, but it is also inventory. The world you dig out of the white is not the one you put away in November. Fences lean like men who didn't sleep. The shed door, swelled and then shrunken, gapes like a pulled tooth. The hay you stacked with pride has settled with secrets. You pry the top bale and find the mold ring where the cover blew off in a December gale you hadn't noticed because you were busy not freezing to death. You sigh. You add hay fork repairs to the day's list and better tarps to next year's plan. The animals step into the light with a caution you recognize. There. Hooves punch through rotten snow and find mud that grips and won't let go. You lead them toward higher ground, sun-bitten patches where old grass combs the air with last year's hands. They tug at winter coats that want to peel free. You curry out the dead hair, a blizzard of brown that flies on a warm gust and vanishes. Like a bad dream told at breakfast. Then the reckonings you knew were coming and tried not to picture at night arrive. Down in the drawers and along the fences, here and there across the white frozen bodies, cattle in crooked attitudes, hooped with rime eyes, dulled to marbles. Some piled along a fence where wind pressed them until they could not step aside. Some facing open country, as if they had seen something better and walked toward it until cold made the last decision. You tip your hat. You do not say much. You make a mark in a notebook you had hoped not to fill with that kind of math. Asterisk. Neighbors do the same. The first trips to town after roads reappear are changed from autumn's swagger. Men who rode with spurs that rang now stepped quiet. The saloon's piano sounds different in a room that knows the cost of a winter. Papers are full of numbers, losses, percentages, words like crippling and ruin, and words like rebuild spoken by lips that still tremble. Bankers go pale under their hats. Some ranch names vanish as if the wind picked them up and set them down elsewhere where you will never ride. But in the wreckage, a sober intelligence grows. Open range those wide, country-length drifts of cattle with brands like flags belongs to an era that winter has now stamped finished. The survivors start to fence, not to keep neighbors out, but to keep feed in and animals alive when storms turn miles into prisons. They cut hay in summer like their grandfathers scythed wheat for bread row after row, stack after stack, not romantic, not negotiable. They build windbreaks with rails and woven willow, plant lines of fast-growing poplar where money and water allow. Craft shelter not just for people, but for the wealth on hooves that carries families through March. The talk in town changes. Drives shrink. Contracts mention winter feed like a wedding mentions rings. A railroad agent smiles like a fox. More cars to move, baled hay. More reason to lay track where cattle can be loaded without weeks of walking. And the old cowboy songs. Pick up new Versailles about wire fences catching the moonlight and hay. Knives ringing like bells against frozen stacks. You change with it, not because you want to, but because you must. You've been a student of the sky. Now you become a student of grass. Which meadow makes the sweetest bales? Which swale floods and shouldn't be cut before July? Which ditch line, if you clean it in September, will pour water in June, where you need to see green? You build a hay sled that slides easy. You swap the fancy saddle you used to admire for a harness that fits a horse like a handshake. You hammer gleaned nails straight and save pennies for a stretch of woven wire and a post-hole digger that bites, even when the ground remembers January. Spring isn't only counting losses, it's counting promises you can keep next time. You stack the last of the dead where a knoll catches wind and sun. Set a match when the law allows, and watch smoke write a clean sentence across a blue sky. You shovel ash into a barrel once it cools. Ash to lie, lie to soap, soap to clean hands that will build fences straighter and stacks higher. Waste nothing is not a motto. It's a belt that keeps your pants up when everything else is slipping. And then one evening, because spring knows, dram you hear frogs. First one, then a drunk choir. The creek talks again, full-throated, bragging about rocks it just discovered. Geese draw fat V's across the sky, and the sound of them crowds your chest until you can't decide whether to laugh or swear. You do both, quietly, as you fix a hinge with hands that still ache from shovel handles. The Thor's reckoning is not just a bill, it's a syllabus. It tells you what you failed and what you passed and what the final will look like next year. It is brutal and it is fair in the way glaciers are fair. No favorites, only physics. And yet, amid the tally, you feel a lift because the world is liquid again. And work that felt like an argument in January feels like a partnership in April. You put your palm to the flank of a cow who made it, feel her warmth like an oath, and say out loud to no one, we'll do it different. We'll do it better. Winter nods, already sharpening its tools somewhere up the calendar, and you nod back, already sharpening yours. Asterisk you're back in your bed. Many winters later, or maybe it's a different century altogether, with lights. That hum and glass that never frosts unless you ask it to for Christmas. You lie down and the mattress shapes itself around you like a good memory. Somewhere a heater purrs. Somewhere a thermostat blinks a number that means comfort. But the body remembers other math. It knows the weight of blankets is a kind of promise, and the sound of wind has more than one accent. Frontier winters are not a museum piece. They're a lesson plan taped to the inside of every human house. We still layer. Fashion pretends otherwise. But on the days that cut to the bone, you grab wool because someone long ago learned that wet doesn't scare it. You still keep tomorrow's clothes near the warm place radiator. Vent, foot of the bed, without knowing why it feels smart. You bank your modern fire set, the timer, lower the thermostat. Close the curtains heavy as quilts and you call it efficiency, which is a city word for survival. You cook stews in January because your ancestors discovered that a pot that simmers all day feeds more than hunger. The scent lifts the room's ceiling. The act gives you a reason to come back to the stove and stir and think. You find yourself saving bones for broth, not because money is tight, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but because thrift tastes like wisdom. You light one lamp in a corner and read there on purpose, leaving the rest of the house dim, and feel warmth concentrate the way it did in a one-room cabin with an iron heart humming in the corner. You still set ropes, though now they're systems, and calendars and group chats. You check on neighbors when the news says storm. You text at odd hours to ask, you good? You carry a spare charger like a match tin. You keep a flashlight by the bed like a lantern trimmed and ready. The principle is older than towns. You look for each other when the white comes down. And the white wears many masks. Snow, grief, power outages, bad news on a Tuesday. The rope between doors is a voice, a ride, a casserole, a knock. You hold it anyway. And when you can't sleep, when your mind remembers January with too much clarity or not enough, you use frontier medicine without the fuss. You make a small list 3 beads on a string and finish them. You sweep a corner. You set the kettle so you can hold something hot. You take a breath at the open door, cold or cool, rain or stars, and let the outside reset the inside. You hum a tune someone taught you at a kitchen table with a coffee ring the size of a biscuit on it. And you don't care if you're in key, because the walls you live inside are patient. There's a reason weighted. Blankets sell and candlelight. Apps thrive and people listen to strangers' voices telling them stories as they fall asleep. The body likes layers. The mind likes ritual. The soul likes a narrative that says, "You are warm. The storm is outside. There is work tomorrow. You are not alone." That's not nostalgia. That's human architecture. Frontier wisdom still fits. Modern doors and smaller ways, too. You rotate your pantry without turning it into a panic. You keep extra water because you don't like the bleak, metallic taste of the faucet when the grid hiccups. You learn one real knot and teach it to a kid and watch their face when the rope obeys. You plant one windbreak tree oak where oak belongs. Cedar where cedar doesn't bully the creek, and you'll never meet the version of you who blesses that shade or that snow shield. But they'll be out there, tipping a hat you used to own. You keep beauty in the corners where you work, a stitched pattern on a mitten, a sanded edge on a shelf, a photo of a sky you saw that one March when Thor spoke in rivulets along the ditch and geese wrote their map. Overhead, beauty is not luxury in a season that tries to make everything functional. It's fuel for the part of you that insists on being more than a furnace. And maybe once a winter, any winter, you do something deliberately old. Bank a fire in a wood stove. Boil down a pot of snow into tea just to taste the quiet in it. Lay out clothes at the foot of the bed and feel the small grace of putting on warmth in the morning. Write a line in a winter book that no one will read but you. Wind with teeth today, but the soup was good. You will sleep warmer for it, and not because the room is any different, because you are, when you finally drift on a Tuesday night with tomorrow's list folded in the dish on the nightstand, with the cat a small, efficient radiator against your ankle, with the heat set a few degrees lower out of respect for bills, and the planetule here, beneath the hum of what you own, the old sounds, a stove ticking as iron cools, rope humming lightly in the wind, a neighbor's laugh through a wall of weather, your own steady breath, the bellows that got you through. You'll picture a cabin lamp, a small circle of yellow, pushing at a window furred with frost. The person inside who is you, and was you, and will be you banks the fire, checks the door, lays out the morning, and slides under weight you chose. The storm can be loud, it always has been. The wisdom we inherited is louder if we let it speak. Patience, preparation, community, ritual, a stubborn joy that refuses to yield the night. You stretch your toes into the warm, blessed pocket you made at the foot of the bedstone, warmed 100 years ago. Blanket warmed. Tonight end, your jaw unclenches, shoulders drop. Breath lengthens. Sleep arrives the way dawn does, on a clear March after a ruinous winter. Gradually at first, then all at once, light pooling where cold once sat. The whitest drift is outside. Inside there is a small, fateful heat, an old story told well, and you finally fully warm. Asterisk.